So, this is going to be a podcast like the other video, but hey, this time we're going to have a little bit more visual action because, I actually spent like a few weeks working on, the visuals for this. Well, I've kind of lost whenever it comes to time, so maybe it was just a week. But anyways, this is a draft guide, right? And I wrote it, and it's not really a guide so much as it is just, what it says at the top. General tips and tricks. Because there's no real, universal guide unless I'm literally there helping you draft while you're in a Power League match. But tangents aside, I'm basically making this video as a way to explain some of the things I probably couldn't fit into the guide itself, like on Reddit, whenever I post it there. And it's also, I might go into some of the design processes I went through this, because a lot of the slides here went through a bunch of iterations, and we have we have 4 slides of actual content, 2 of an introduction. This is one of them, right? So I am going to start, and if you want to just listen to this, that's okay, but I will have the slides up, so if you want to check, you can see which slide I'm generally talking about. I'm going to preface that every time I change slides, kind of like right now. So this first slide is basically going over, okay, so how much does a draft phase actually matter whenever it comes to Brawl Stars, and how much does a guide for draft phase actually matter? And so the most important part about Power League, and what's more important, or arguably more important than the draft phase, is actually just playing the game. You can win with any combination of brawlers, provided that you're good enough. And even if it's slightly not optimized, you can still eke out wins, depending on, just how good you are, how much you outclass your opponents, and if you're comfortable in those brawlers. Of course, how you play is going to matter more than a draft. But what a draft can give you is that it increases your chances of winning, right? Statistically, right? And for certain maps, you might like certain strategies, right? So knowing what to pick when of your roster of comfortable picks is probably the most important thing about it. And of course, I feel like something that's not prefaced enough whenever it comes to guides on YouTube or on other social medias from big YouTubers is that no guide can play the game for you. A lot of what comes to playing the actual game, or even just drafting, something that's just effectively mental chess or whatever, there's still skill involved that there's only so much that a guide can give you. So the rest of it has to be skill whenever it comes to what you're picking, what decisions did you make, what your bans are. It has to be up to the player's skill, right? So a draft can only help you so much. But what I can do is do exactly what the point of this video is going to be. That's give you a few tips on how to upgrade your draft game. Yeah. So into the actual meat and potatoes, this is the first slide. And I'm not going to be reading verbatim what's on these slides. I might paraphrase a little bit, but I'm mostly going to be going on different tangents. And if you want to pause and shut me up and read them for yourself, or if you want to just pull up the ones I have on my Reddit account, then you can go ahead. But let's talk about rules of the coin flip. Now, it's an ominous name for something that's kind of simple to explain initially. So the basic idea is that depending on whether you win the coin flip, so whenever the coin flip flips blue, or whether you lose the coin flip, or whenever the coin flip flips red, depends, or it changes what your strategy in banning and in picking becomes, right? And there are certain advantages that the winner has, and there's certain advantages that the loser has. And of course there are disadvantages for both, but I'll get into those when I talk about them individually, right? But before I get into actual strategy, I kind of wanted to get something out of the way. So I feel like a lot of the time, people really like to say that, the draft phase is just a 50-50. The person who wins the draft, or who wins the coin flip, wins the draft phase. And yeah, maybe that was true whenever we had just a single like insanely broken threat. And okay, yeah, there are gonna be people in the chat that are gonna be arguing with me, and I know people on Discord already argue with me about the state of the meta and how OP or not OP some brawlers are. But I feel like yes, okay, winners obviously have an advantage, or they had. I feel like they had a major advantage before 6 bans was instated, because the person who, or the team that loses the draft phase, they can only, or like they have to ban the best brawler, right? There was one single best brawler, they have to ban it. Now, and if there are 2 best brawlers, now they're fucked, because they're going to only ban one, and then the other one gets picked by the enemy team and they just lose instantly, right? So maybe that was true before 6 bans and before this meta, but I feel like right now, 6 bans, and especially how relatively balanced the meta is, I feel like there are like 5 brawlers that you can argue are the top one right now. Well, maybe 5's a stretch, maybe 3. Those are Eve, Max, and Janet, by the way, if you wanted to know. But right now, I feel like, and I'll go into it more whenever I talk about loser ban, or the losers of the coin flip, whenever coin flip's red. But I feel like the team that loses the coin flip actually has a major advantage right now. And I feel like theoretically they should have a major advantage, provided that there's not like 1 broken threat in the game or 2 broken threats in the game. I'll get into that. But first, let's talk about the winner of the coin flip. So I feel like there are 2 major or like 2 things you need to remember when you win the coin flip. So when you're banning, you want to ban counter picks, right? And more importantly, you want to ban 6th or last picks, right? Because, and I'm gonna get more into this whenever I talk about losers, but the 6th pick is what decides, like, if there's any pick that's like, oh, you win from draft, it's your 6th pick, right? Because the 6th pick has the ability to counter the entire enemy team. And first pick, or the team that wins the coin flip, doesn't have access to that like super broken counter pick, right? So they have to make do with like, you know, power picks and safe picks, soft counters. I'll get more into the counters later, but they can't get any like trump card, right? Unlike loser. So what they have to do is that they have to ban as many really powerful trump cards, and so, or as they can. So usually that comes in the form of like a tank or a thrower, right? Some notable examples that come to mind are stuff like Ashe and Rosa on a map like Sneaky Fields or Double Swoosh, like Squeak on like every map in the game, Barley on Super Stadium and Hot Potato, etc., etc., Sprout and Dueling Beetles, etc. And I feel like that's like a major thing that people miss out on, because when people win the draft phase, or whenever they win the coin flip, the most common mistake I see is that they just ban the best brawlers in the game, which is why? Like why? Like you can pick those. Like okay, I get it if you don't have them like maxed out or whatever, or like power 10 or whatever, but still. Okay, in a perfect world, that shouldn't happen, right? You shouldn't be banning the best brawlers in the game, and you shouldn't be wasting your bans on that, right? And you shouldn't be shooting yourself in the leg by doing that. And the other mistake that I see people making is that they ban safe picks, right? Which is effectively like the same thing, but it just limits like the amount of actually good counters you can use, and it makes the whole drafting phase so much messy. Like that's something about like banning, and I put this as an example, right, where you ban Crow in order to first pick Max. I'll get into other strategy, right? Actually, no, let me get into it now, and I'll come back to the Crow thing specifically. But the other strategy that first pick has to work with, or like the other advantage that first pick has to work with whenever it comes to banning, is that you can target ban, right? So let's say you want to run, I think a simple example is like Lola. So let's say you want to run Lola on a map like Can't Touch This, right? Super, well, it's kind of a slow-paced map, actually. It's like a slow-paced heist map, right? And Belle is usually a very good generalist pick there because she's She's just a ranged brawler, and more importantly, she counters Lola. Right? So if you have first pick and you want to pick Lola, you ban out Belle, and suddenly you have a huge advantage, right? Because the best Lola counter in Belle just got banned out, right? So now you have a pretty safe Lola pick, right? And in competitive especially, and whenever you can communicate with your teammates, it gets a lot more complicated, and it gets a lot more diverse with what you can do with this strategy. So something I've seen is that when Layer Cake, I think it still isn't competitive, but Layer Cake especially. So Tick is a really insane pick there, but like the amount of aggressive stuff you can run kind of makes Tick weak. But whenever a team has first pick, a pretty common strategy that I see is that the team that wants to pick Tick, so the team that has first pick, they ban out like the two best aggressive brawlers. So usually that's like Max and Mortis, or like Mortis and Daryl, or like Max and Daryl, or whatever, right? They ban the two best aggressive brawlers, and they have this super safe first pick Tick, and it's so crazy. It just carries games, and it can even outplay stuff like Daryl, which is why I think it's so good. But that's a pretty so it can get pretty complicated. You can like tailor it to whatever you want to play, right? So like let me think of another example. Like if you want to do something crazy and first pick Sprout, right? And first pick Sprout, that's ridiculous. But let's say you want to first pick Sprout on Belle's Rock, which is probably Sprout's best map in the game right now. You want to first pick Sprout on Belle's Rock. What you can do is you can ban out the best tanks. First of all, like people like to run Mortis as a hard counter to Sprout, so you can ban out Mortis, and then you can ban out Brock, so they don't have that counter pick option, and then you can also ban out like another aggressive brawler, like a Fang, or like a Daryl, I guess. I don't think Daryl is that good on Belle's Rock, but I guess just like Fang, Mortis, Brock, and then you pick Sprout, and you instantly win the game with your first pick, right? They try and pick Janet, they try and pick Pam, or like if they ban Janet, they're screwed, right? Because then they can't use backstage exit, whatever. So that's like a super big advantage that first pick can have, right? If they coordinate their bans, of course. But, and I want to go back. Remember when I was talking about Crow? So on the and I was talking about mistakes that first picks often make, or that the coin flip winners often make, is that they ban single counters and then they don't pick like the specific brawler, right? So I used Crow as an example here. So if you want to first pick Max, and then obviously you ban Crow because Crow's like the only Max counter in the game right now. What you can do is, or what I see a lot is that people will ban Crow, pick something else that doesn't abuse the Crow ban, right? And then the enemy team, and this happens a lot in Ring of Fire, and then the enemy team picks Max, right? And now, like, what are you supposed to do into that Max pick? Like you ban out their counter, so you're basically effectively doing the strategy or the advantage that you have, you're giving it to the opponents, which is super common mistake I see. Frustrates me to no end. If I see somebody banning Crow, I also instantly ban Max because I can't trust them enough to ban Max unless they're hovering it, like they're pre-picking it. Super big mistake that I see. And then obviously the other advantage that the coin flip winner has is first pick, right? So first pick is like, well, it's like the best brawlers in the game, right? Common first picks right now are like Eve and Janet. Janet sometimes you don't see, and I think Eve is overrated, but Max is also a really common first pick. Super safe brawlers, or just super strong brawlers. Other like super safe brawlers are like Bo, Lola. At times, Ems can be a really safe pick on a map like Double Swoosh, for instance, or Snake Prairie. Crow, oftentimes a safe pick. Also locks down your Max counter immediately, so if Max is still in play, insta-pick Crow is pretty good. It's like good on every map. Crow's super versatile right now. Yeah, and so it just really depends on the map. So what the most optimal pick, and I have a little note at the bottom here, which basically says, oh, you can look on my Reddit profile, and I have a list of optimal and best choices, right? I have those 20 slides of draft guide that you can use right now. If you go use/valuable prize, that's self-load. Awesome. But yeah, so the coin flip winners, they can target ban. and they have first pick. Those are their advantages. So what are the advantages of loser? And why do I think that the losers are even like more favored to win than the winners, right? In a perfect world, of course. So obviously losers are kind of hard locked into banning the best brawlers for the map and the most safe brawlers for the map. Or, and I'll get more into this, what does constricting mean? But they can ban the most constricting picks on the map. Not necessarily first picks, by red first picks, because of grammar. But obviously banning best brawlers like banning Eve, banning Janet, banning Squeak, banning, you don't really see Ruff's banned even though he's broken. Banning Max, banning Piper and Nanny on, the maps that they're ridiculous on, etc., etc. They're kind of locked into banning this, so there's not like that much strategy. I mean, like the only strategy I can really see is like, oh, we think that the enemy team overrates Eve, so they're gonna first pick Eve and then we're gonna abuse the shit out of the Eve pick. And then, that's good. It's good. I like seeing that. Eve overrated. Now, there's like a little joke here. Ban Eve if you want to prevent brain damage. This is a little. I'm siding with the community this time. Oh, no more base fries. No, I'm siding with them with one thing. I think Eve is freaking annoying. But and there's the other thing I wanted to get into, which is what is a constricting pick really? And I didn't really explain it here, so I'll explain it here now in this video. It's exactly what the video is for. So a constricting pick is basically something that forces you to play a certain strategy in the game. So basically, it's a pick, well, maybe it's not necessarily strong, but it controls what every other pick in the game will be, right? I feel like a good example of that is like, well, the example I put here are wall breakers on safe zone, of course, but I feel like an even better example I could have used is like Rico on safe zone, right? Because if Rico is left in play, like, okay, Rico is an amazing brawler on the map, but he's not like, I think it's arguable that he's the best pick on the map, but he's good. Like, he's good, but would I call him so broken that you need to ban him? Probably not. Like, you can pinch him on the sideline and like, he's good. I'm probably a top 5 pick, probably even the best pick. But I wouldn't say he's so broken that he gives the team that picks him such an insurmountable advantage. But what he does do is that whenever you pick a Rico on safe zone, you're basically, if wall breakers are not banned, you're basically telling the enemy team, oh, you have to pick wall breakers or else we're gonna send Rico right lane, he's gonna get into the pocket and he's going to do infinite amounts of damage to our team, unless we have like some weird comp that just like target bans Rico and then loses to the other 2 picks, right? So Rico is basically forcing your opponents to play a certain way, right? So that's why you see a second pick ban Rico, or either ban Rico or they ban wall breaks a lot, because sometimes you don't want to play this game, right? You don't want to just play snipers, right? People love playing tanks on safe zone right now. It's a very easy strategy. Playing stuff like Daryl and Colette, it can get countered by wall break strats. So, and that's a more common play style people want to play because maybe it's more consistent, maybe they're more comfortable with it, right? And so I think that's one of the ways you're banning, like if you're last pick, or if you, the coin flip loser, excuse me, that's one of the ways that your bans aren't like locked in from the moment you lose the coin flip, because you can ban depending on what you're comfortable playing and what you're not comfortable playing, right? Like, oh, if on sneaky fields you don't like playing against tanks or playing with tanks, you can ban tanks, right? So it does give you that level of control to ban, well, things that are constricting. And now the big thing about coin flip loser, and the reason why I think coin flip loser is so broken, is 6th pick. Now, this requires a little bit of skill on the side of the people who are drafting, right? But 6th picks can literally just win you the game instantly, especially if the enemy team doesn't draft well. And even if they draft well, there's almost always going to be one not Swiss Army knife, but there's going to be one silver bullet against their team. Right? Almost always, right? And we see that with like a bunch of weird picks. Like, why is Zeta playing Edgar and Sandy on Hot Potato? What's going on? Why are they playing Amber on Flaring Phoenix? What's going on? right? So it's like these silver bullets, right? And these can oftentimes, like people always say, oh, the first pick can just instantly win you the game. But that's just not true, right? Last picks are what's winning you the game from the draft phase instantaneously, right? And so some common last picks you see are stuff like Squeak is so strong as a last pick, right? If they don't have anything tanky or like any type of assassin, Squeak just like destroys on literally every map. Surge is an underrated one, honestly. Like Power Shield is so crazy, but if they have like body blocks or if they have range, then Surge can struggle. But if they have like closer range stuff like Ems or Sandy and like their mid is like a Stew or something. I'm taking this like Super Stadium, right? You pick a Surge, you instantly win. Surge with Power Shield is so crazy, right? And then other things are like tanks, of course, right? I've even seen like some insane, like even though Buzz isn't that good right now, I've seen some insane Buzz last picks and it goes so crazy. Bull, I lose so many Bull mains in Legendary, it's kind of unfortunate, but Ashe, of course, is a classic one. Frank is the strongest counter pick of them all. Frank, literally, if they don't have a way to like hard counter tanks, Frank will just eat them. He'll eat them alive. And yeah, I think the really big thing is that 6 picks are just this silver bullet. You can use them to perfectly counter the enemy team. And even if they have a really good draft, you can still find a way to counter their entire team. And that's one of the skills of drafting is, and that's why I get so excited right now to play the game, because if you, I get so excited to like, play Team Power League, play Club League, because if our team loses the coin flip, that lets me, and I'm tooting my horn a little bit, lets me flex my drafting knowledge and perfectly counter and pick my Power 9 Amber in order to counter the whole enemy team, right? Pick my Power 10 Carl, whatever. But yeah, ultimately, I think Coin Flip Loser has a slight advantage in this meta. Maybe that'll change in the next update when they add Broken Brawler 4, 5, and 6 or whatever, and so... yeah. Anyways, let's go on to the next slide, which is counterpicking theory. And I think of all of the slides here, I think counterpicking theory is probably my favorite. And that's because I'm bringing terminology from other competitive games and bringing them to Brawl Stars. And I think that's like one of my favorite things, one of the things that draws me to making guides like this. So in this case, the competitive game I'm taking from is, and this, if you've seen my last video, this might not be a surprise to you, but it's competitive Pokemon, right? And so there's common terminology there that I literally never see used in Brawl Stars, right? And in this case, they differentiate between a counter and a check, right? And I've literally never heard anybody talk about this in, like, maybe the casters for like monthly finals or NSI talked about like, oh, well, like that's a good pick. Like it doesn't let them lose to it, but they don't, or doesn't let them lose to the enemy comp, but they don't say like the name of what that is, and that is what a check is, right? But I made another distinction, not just from counter and check, but also hard counter and soft counter, and I'll explain that when I get to each. But let's first get to hard counters, and if you ever think of like a one-sided matchup, this is what a hard counter is. So hard counters are basically like the classics, right? Like Mortis counters throwers, Gale counters tanks, Shelly is like the biggest hard counter to tanks ever to exist. You should never lose against a full team of tanks with a Shelly, right? That's what a hard counter looks like. And a few like distinct characteristics of a hard counter is that this one pick can just instantly win you the game, right? But you should, and then another characteristic that they have is that they're almost always going to be picked as last picks, right? Almost always. And that's because if you pick them at any other time, they themselves are super easy to counter as well. So they counter super abusable things, and then they themselves also oftentimes have hard counters. So like the Mortis example, for instance, or no, let's do the Morris example first. The Morris example, for instance, right? If they pick, let's say they do that thing that I was talking about before, where they first pick Sprout and Bell's Rock, right? But they don't ban Mortis, right? So you pick Mortis, right? You pick Mortis right after the Sprout first pick. right? And then your teammate goes like Byron or something. I don't know. I don't care. But they go Byron or something, but then what happens is that the enemy team, they pick a counter to Mortis. They can pick like a Pam, scraps like that Mortis. That sounded weird, but they can pick a Pam. They can even pick a Gale, right? And then suddenly that Mortis advantage he has over Sprout suddenly turned into a major disadvantage because suddenly now Gale or Pam just has a free lane, right? And they never let Mortis play the game. So, but if you pick him as a sixth pick, or any hard counter, if you pick them as a sixth pick, the enemy team doesn't have the opportunity to counter them, right? So that's why you most often see hard counters as the sixth pick. Even though, it's like, obviously, if they first pick Sprout, maybe you should pick Mortis right after, right? That's what you might think, but more often than not, you shouldn't, because then you can get a counter yourself, whatever. And then Sprout himself, right? The reason why Sprout himself gets hard counters is because he is also a hard counter. He most often counters like really squishy brawlers, like brawlers with 4,200 HP and lower, I think. It's around that range. He hard counters those type of brawlers that don't have like some specific mechanic to beat them, right? So more often than not, it's going to be like Belle and Byron. He hard counters Piper before she gets her wall break. Sprout. It can often even just beat Brock. Even though Brock has the wall break, because Sprout can either outrange or just have the same range. It's just too many walls for Brock, right? So it's like those really squishy picks that Sprout does really well into. And he effectively hard counters them, right? But he is also a hard counter because he himself has hard counters, like Mortis and Daryl and et cetera, et cetera. You get the picture, right? So hard counters oftentimes have their own hard counters and et cetera, et cetera. Let's get to soft counters. So soft counters are like, so whenever somebody thinks of most quote unquote counter picks, you'll see or like what people call a counter pick or a good counter pick on, like normally that doesn't happen sixth pick is usually a soft counter, right? So usually it's a good brawler, right? They don't themselves have like many hard counters, right, or viable hard counters, right? But they don't do as well a job as countering as like a hard counter does. So, and an example I used before I get to examples, let me explain the other thing about soft counters. So the other part of a soft counter is that usually they don't counter like the enemy brawler like entirely. Like they don't destroy the enemy brawler and everything that the enemy brawler does. They oftentimes counter one of their like main mechanics and that's it. So that leaves the brawler that they're countering some room to outplay them because they still have tools. It's not like all of their tools are being shut down, right? And so I think my favorite example of this is Belle versus Lola. And I've even seen people on r/Brawl Stars competitive. I've seen people, if you see this video, you know who you are, talking about how Belle doesn't counter Lola. Man! Okay, but Lola gets countered by Belle. Right, it's a very common counter pick you see in this meta at least, and that's because she basically makes it that ego becomes a liability more than it benefits Lola, because you can just shoot the ego and then it just bounces infinite shots off of Lola and it really sucks for her. So yeah, but you have to remember that's only when she has her ego out, right? Any other time, Lola's doing just fine into Belle. Like, okay, range also counters Belle, but Lola, it's not like Lola doesn't have range herself. Like, she has good range, right? So she can try and fight Belle, and oftentimes she can win against Belle before ego even comes down. But because Lola has this ability to just shut down this one mechanic that Lola has, then she is a soft counter, right? She shuts down this one mechanic. She prevents Lola from doing what she wants to do, but it's not like Lola can't do anything the entire game, right? And I think a better example than the Ems versus Ashe thing is also another one that's fairly common, especially lower down. It's Sandy acting as a soft counter to Terra, right? And it hasn't been like this for like a majority of Sandy and Terra's existence until Support from Beyond came out. And then when Support from Beyond came out, Sandy suddenly became soft counter to Terra, right? And that's because Sandy basically invalidates the existence of Support from Beyond, which is Terra's second gadget. So you literally can't use like your little shadows to get control in the early game. And Sandy just like pierces through all of them and hits Terra anyways, right? But it's not like Sandy is preventing Terra from doing her job. Like a Terra against a Sandy still outranges a Sandy, and she still charges her super, right? And when she gets super, that's all Terra's good for. Like that's what you're playing Terra for, is to get Terra super. Or if you're using it as like a weird counter pick to Stu or whatever, or Surge, I guess, or Jean, or Pam. But anyways, she'll still get her super. That's the main thing that Terra wants to do. And Sandy just counters one of her mechanics, right? And now that makes it way harder for the Terra to actually win, but it's not like Terra can't do anything. Terra can still do her job well. I feel like that's the big distinction, right? A hard counter will not let you do your job, and a soft counter will still let you do your job, but you still get countered. And then the one I'm most excited to talk about is a check. And well, what is a check like in general terms? So I'm pretty sure, like I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure the term originates in chess. And you know, if you're familiar with chess, and I assume that most people are, but before you checkmate the enemy king, you put them into check, which means that their king has to act and has to like move before they can like do another play. So when you put them in check, the king has to move, right? Because one more move from whatever piece is putting it into check will mean that the king dies, right? Or that your king gets knocked over. So that kind of works with the definition of the check or of a check that I'm going for, what the Pokemon community uses, or the competitive Pokemon community uses. So a check basically forces the enemy to like duel you, sort of, and it's not like you're necessarily countering the brawler, or it's not like you're countering the brawler that your brawler checks, but it's more like you're not letting them beat your team, right? So I think the best example of this is like, well, it's a very common one, Byron versus Belle. Now, you see this all the time on like sniper maps, on like Dueling Beetles, Belle's Rocks, Shooting Star, whatever. One team picks Byron, the other team picks Belle, right? And this can work really either way. I feel like, I put this here, I feel like Byron does have the advantage versus Belle in a pure 1v1 because once you get super, you can splash yourself and you have the gadget to keep you alive. And so Byron in the moment has more tools to beat Belle, right? But Belle is just generally a more, like, she's a more sniper than Byron. She has more sniper stuff in general. But when you pick a Belle versus Byron or Byron versus Belle, you're basically saying, oh, our team is not going to lose to Byron or Belle themselves because we're confident that our Byron can 1v1 the enemy Belle, right? So they basically just cancel out, right? And the best checks are those that just do the job of the brawler they're checking better, right? So if they do their job better, that's like the edge that you're getting, right? You have these brawlers that cancel out, but if you're playing to the objective more, then you still have an advantage, right? And that's the best example I can come up, or that's the reason why Bull basically acts as a check to Daryl, right? And this is applicable to literally 2 maps in the game, or 2 maps in Power League right now, which is Can't Touch This and Safe Zone, right? Or not Safe Zone, Hot Potato. Can't Touch This and Hot Potato, right? So, and maybe less so on Can't Touch This because you don't see a lot of Bulls or a lot of Daryls on Can't Touch This, even though they're freaking broken. But on Hot Potato especially, a lot of the time, so Daryl is obviously like the quote-unquote better pick on that map. But oftentimes you see the main response to Daryl not being like a hard counter like a Gale or something, which sucks, or like a Griff. Oftentimes you just see a Bull being the hard counter to, or being the check of choice to Daryl, or the pick of choice to go against the Daryl, right? And that's because, so they're like the same brawler, right? They both do close range shotgun damage, right? And whenever they go in a 1v1, their strategies are basically just don't beat the enemy or the other brawler super, right? But what Bull has, and I feel like in the direct 1v1, Daryl does have a slight advantage, right? Because he charges his super over time, and even though Bull can burst him down a little bit faster, generally Daryl is going to be having a better time against a Bull. But what Bull has over Daryl is that his super is insane for actually just bum rushing that heist safe, and so he doesn't even need to worry about the 1v1 most of the time. He just does Daryl's job better, right? And that's the reason why Bull checks Daryl, right? Because if you want to just play the advantage, Bull is Daryl, and marginally worse than Daryl, but he's so much more effective at just getting or safe damage most of the time. Most of the time. Now, it's not like, because both ways, like Bull does Daryl's job marginally better, and Daryl does 1v1's Bull marginally better, right? But playing the objective is always more important than like a raw 1v1. And if you can play the objective better, then you are effectively checking your opponents. And yeah, that's hard counters, soft counters, and checks. And something about this slide that I really liked is I have this little cutout effect if you look at the screen, right? And I use that for the rest of the slides because I think it's really cool. So the next slide, oh boy, weighing cost versus benefit. Now, I feel like on the surface, if just hearing the name, it might be a little bit confusing, but this is like, if anyone asks me for tips about how to draft, this type of information is what I tell them most, right? Especially the two things in the gray boxes, right? But, well, let me go over those first. So the main things that I tell people whenever they ask me, oh, how do you get better at drafting? Or more specifically, less specifically, how do you get better at Power League, right? And I say it comes down to your picks, right? So what makes a good pick? And I say, good pick is what's optimal. And what's optimal what's optimal for you may not necessarily be what's optimal in general, right? Or in theory, right? Because and I'm a little bit at fault here, but I don't think so entirely, because that's not really the point of the draft guides. It's not really to tell you what to pick every game, just to help you see what your options are. But there is no guide, there is no player that can tell you what to play better than what you know what to play, right? And obviously it helps to know like what you can play, right? The guide can tell you what of your comfort picks is good to play, but it's always better to like listen to yourself more than the teammate, right? Of course, like this is like in a Power League environment, right? Obviously in competitive players have to be the most optimal that they can, more often than not, right? And that involves picking the best picks always, right? And learning the best picks, right? So, and yeah, they also pick their comfort picks sometimes, right? Just look at Zeta, right? The best team in the world, they don't play optimally. Like they don't play, or quote unquote, they don't pick the meta picks, right? Most of the time. They pick what they're comfortable with, and that gets them wins, right? So that's what's more important. It's being able to recognize when picking something comfortable is better than picking something that's picking something that's someone says that you should pick, right? And also another skill in that is being able to recognize when just like a check is better than a soft counter, or when you should do a soft counter and not a hard counter, and that mostly comes in the intermediate picks, and etc., etc. But that's basically like the big skill of drafting, is knowing what will statistically raise your chances of winning more than any other pick. And that doesn't have to be what's necessarily the best, but what's most optimal. What's most optimal is what's best for you, right? So, and never, I can't stress this enough, never let a guide or another player tell you what to pick, right? Because more often than not, that like if you're not comfortable with that pick, then you're not going to do good, right? It's not going to be better than just something you're comfortable with, right? Like if you main tanks, play tanks. Tanks are good in this meta. If you like snipers, play snipers. Don't like play something weird like roughs, or like something hard like I don't know, like don't pick a Belle if you're not good at Belle, right? Play to your strengths, right? And if you want to get better on the brawler, sure, you can practice the brawler, right? But if you want to win, you have to know what you're comfortable with, right? And that's like the biggest, I think that's the greatest piece of advice I can give. So if you're gonna take anything away from this video, or from this guide, hell, that's it. That's what you're taking away from this video. Play what you want to play. Play what feels right to you. Okay, benefits versus costs, or benefits outweighing costs, right? That is what you want to pick. You want to pick a pick that has its benefits outweigh its costs. So what does that look like? And I just went on the whole spiel about what's most optimal for you is what you want to play, right? But I feel like a more objective way of looking at it, or of talking about benefits versus costs, is when should I pick a hard counter, or like when should I pick the soft counter, or when should I pick a check? Because most picks in the game will be checks, right? You want to check your opponents, because whenever you're drafting, the entire point of drafting is the enemy team picks something, so let's try and one-up them while not overextending so they can counterpick us, right? So it's being able to identify when it's better to pick a certain brawler over another that I think is the other most important skill. But yeah, so, and the examples I used is basically, so if you're a last pick, maybe you shouldn't pick something safe or something standard, right? If you're a last pick, maybe you should go and pick that like really strong counter pick, right? Because maybe that will give you like the edge that you need, right? So a good example of this is like, if the enemy team picks an early Rosa, right? Maybe, or like an early Rosa on Hard Rock line, maybe you shouldn't pick that like safer Leon pick that can lose to Rosa. Maybe you should pick the pick that abuses Rosa, abuses her high HP total, defeats your Surge super. You run a Surge instead of a Leon in the last pick. Like being able to identify that is super important, right? And the other example I used has to do with like, picking stuff you're more comfortable with, right? So maybe you're not as comfortable with Daryl as you are with Fang, right? And even though Daryl is probably the best tank assassin in the game, Fang's not bad. And if you're comfortable with Fang, that's probably gonna get you more wins than playing Daryl, playing a brawler that you're not comfortable with, right? Now, that's just when benefits outweigh the costs, right? But you should also be able to identify when the opposite is true, when costs of a pick outweigh benefits, right? And so I feel like the best example of that is that if your counter pick in return gives them an even stronger counter pick, you should not pick that counter pick, right? Or if your counter pick is just not good, like at all on the map, just don't pick it. Pick a slightly less hard counter that's actually good on the map, right? And so I use Surge again for the previous example, so I'm gonna use him again. So Surge, maybe you don't want to pick him in the middle of the draft, and instead you want to, like, maybe you don't want to pick him if you're like second or third pick, right? Or fourth pick or fifth pick, right? Because then they can just really easily counter you with something like Ruffs or like Terra, right? And suddenly you are not having a good time, right? So the risk of getting countered when you pick a Surge in the middle might be too much, and like that, the cost is like getting countered, right? So maybe the cost and like the risk of getting countered is too much for the potential benefits that Surge can get, like in being a general counter to like tanks and high HP stuff and brawlers with attack delay and whatever. Counter pick might be too insurmountable, right? And the other example I used, which totally hasn't happened to me twice or anything whenever I was climbing to Legendary 1, is that people will pick tank counters in just like the worst places possible, right? Because, okay, safe zone is a map where people love to play Daryl, they love to play Fang, right? I've seen people play Buzz, I've seen people play Bull, right? Tanks are awesome on that map, right? And the like main tank counters, and like I feel like the main tank counter right now is Gale, right? But the main tank counter in the game is just not good on safe zone. Like, so even having this hard counter tanks like Gale on safe zone is not necessarily giving you an advantage over playing a less hard counter, so a softer counter, and like playing a softer counter that's just better on the map is just better than playing Gale, which is a harder counter, right? And not even Pam. Like, Pam isn't that good on safe zone, right? She can't really get to the enemy safe, right? More often than not, I see like the premier tank counter on safe zone is something like B, right? So B usually, like B doesn't have the DPS to really be that good on safe zone, right? But the benefits of picking B into tanks and just never letting them play the game, right, while still being able to fight at range is what's more important, right? So she has this ability to counter tanks really hard, but she can actually play the map somewhat decently, right? And the same thing kind of applies to like a weirder pick. Like, it's something that I feel like can be kind of inconsistent, but if you're good at 8-bit, 8-bit can actually be a really good counter pick to tanks, right? Because you can get out of the way with of like their gap closing abilities. So like Daryl's roll or Fang's weird Golden Knight kick. You can get out of the way with your gadget, right? You can do this high DPS. You can get their, you can feed your super off of them, especially against Fang, right? So playing these ranged tank counters is way better than picking like a hard tank counter, right? It also applies to a map like Shooting Star. So you don't want to pick Gale into a Mortis, for instance, on Shooting Star. More often than not, you want to pick a B, or even better yet, Pam is actually really good on Shooting Star. Or you can just pick a check, right? You can pick a check like Max. Like a Max should not lose to a Mortis, even though she doesn't really DPS Mortis. She can keep him back and she can like get out of the way of Mortis and try and outplay him, right? So why? So even though maybe Max is not as like nearly as hard to counter as something like Pam or as Gale, just because they're better on the map and just because they do have this ability to slightly check the brawler, maybe that's what's giving you better advantage, right? And so you don't want to pick something that has more costs than it has benefits, and that's really a skill that is up to you to learn, right? And at the bottom here, by the way, like this is like probably the last thing I added, like other than the end card to the guide, the little asterisk at the bottom to better clarify what the greater than sign means. I added that for increased clarity. Thank you, Cold Butter. And then finally, the last slide. Solo Power League versus Team Power League. And now so now you know all of these tips, right? And all of these like little optimizations you can make to your drafting game. But even then, that changes depending on how well you can communicate with your teammates, right? So if most of the time in a solo environment, you can't know what your teammates are good at, you can't know what they're going to pick, and you can't know if their recommendations are good especially, right? So it's better, like in solo Power League, it's better to play your own game than to try and work with your teammates on like making a strategy, right? So I feel like some of the best picks in solos are like picks that you can just like ban out their singular counter, right? So it's brawlers that have like a single really hard counter. You can ban those brawlers like that, just like counter them, those single brawlers that counter them, and then you can have a relatively safe pick, right? So stuff like, I'm gonna go back to the Lola example. So Lola's really strong in solo Power League because you can just ban out Belle and now you have a really safe Lola pick, right? Tanks are really good in Power League because you can ban the hardest tank counter on most maps, which is Gale, and then you're gonna have a field day with your Frank and your Daryl and your Rosa and your Ash, etc., right? And then even stuff like, oh, Belle gets countered by Piper, so you can ban Piper and then just have a really safe Belle pick, right? So all of these picks that have like one really big or like really major counter are like the best solo Power League picks, I think, right? And being able to like think ahead and be like, okay, I'm gonna be banning for the specific pick that I want, right? So for me personally, I play a lot of Lola in solo Power League, right? So other than Max, of course, my most common ban, other than Max, my most common ban is Belle, right? Because if I want to play Lola, I don't want to have them pick Belle first or counter me with Belle, right? I want to be able to play Lola and play her well and carry my team, hopefully, right? And that can apply to most things, right? So, and also playing comfort picks, as I mentioned, way better in solo Power League than pretty much anything else. Pretty much better than team Power, like playing comfort picks is better in team Power League, even better than comp, right? Comfort picks are super good in team Power League because, like I mentioned at the beginning, the most important part about Power League is not how well you can draft, and it's always how well you can play. And if you're comfortable and good at a brawler, play them. It's good, right? It's good in Power League, right? Because playing is important. Playing well is even more important. So then, moving on to the strategies for Team Power League. Now, Team Power League is where you can get like more creative with things. Because most of the time when you're playing Team Power League, you know your teammates, right? And oftentimes you know what they're good at, what they're comfortable, like what strategies they're comfortable with, what they don't like fighting, right? So you can, and it's even better if you can like get into a voice chat with them, because then you can like really coordinate like really good ban strategies, like, banning sprouts counters, and now you can have a really good sprout pick later on, right? Or playing a max comp, right? If you know that your teammates really like playing stuff like Ems or Gene, right? You can communicate these things with your teammates, right? And you know what they're comfortable with. So it's all about being able to coordinate with your team in Team Power League, right? That's the major advantage that being able, or like playing Team Power League, is your communication is so important, right? So, and other examples I went over other than max comps, other than the Sprout thing, which like, okay, pick Gale with Sprout. Like your solo Power League teammates, like if you pick a Sprout early on Gold Arm Gulch, they're not gonna know, oh, I have to pick Gale. Like even if your third is hovering Gale, they might think, oh, my teammate wants to play Gale, so let's give him his Gale pick, and then they pick like something stupid like fucking, I don't know, they pick Byron, and then your opponents, they pick like dude, I don't even know. They pick like a Piper and they pick a Daryl and you instantly lose. Or they pick like a Brock and a Piper and it's like, it's just hopeless, right? So being able to like coordinate, like cover each other's weaknesses in your draft is also something important, because more often than not, you can predict what your teammates are going to play in Team Power League. So you can have these more complicated strategies, right? And you can pick even riskier picks earlier, right? Because you can tell your teammates, oh, now it's 3 people thinking, not just 1 person thinking with each pick, right? So, and obviously your communication has to be good, because bad communication can obviously be more of a liability than it does a benefit, right? So that's just another skill whenever it comes to drafting and the game in general, being able to do proper communication, right? And so, yeah, summary of this, not a very long one, but use your knowledge depending on whether you're playing solo or playing Team Power League. You apply what you know differently, right? So in solo Power League, you try and carry, right? You try and play something that you can play well with, and you're not relying on your teammates, because you never know how good your teammates are. In Team Power League, you can play more as a team, right? It's in the name. And so, I think that's about it. I mentioned that I was going to talk a little about the process of making this, and it's just been like super fun, like making this. If you've noticed, this custom background that I've had on these slides, if you've been looking at the actual video, these custom backgrounds I made, and I'm like super proud of them, because I was able to, in the Brawl Stars fan kit, I was able to find like an actual like developer PSD file for Power League when it was being made in season 4, right? So I was able to use a bunch of those assets, and it's been a really cool process, right? Been working with other people and what they wanted to see with it. I don't know, it's cool. Hopefully I'll get some more stuff out soon. Maybe be wary. I might get a little spicy in my next video, depending on if I decide I want to talk about tanks and tank counters and how they're becoming even more OP and how they need to be toned down at the same time. So look out for my next video, and thank you for watching. This YouTube thing is really fun. I'll see you in the next one.